Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hey everybody, welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited today to have Dr. Todd Bowman again with us. Of course, he's an educator, a psychologist, a neuroscientist. He is just so fun to talk to about human behavior and really what is behind the drivers in each and every one of us. Todd, man, it's so great to jump into another conversation. Today we're going to talk about the unique nuances, experiences, and formation of pastors' kids, the big PK conversation. You doing good today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited about this conversation. We've been talking about this for a while, and to kind of more formally come together and crack this open, I think it's going to be incredible content.
Oh, I love it. Well, the reason that we decided this is a great conversation partly is because as a professional, you've worked with pastors' kids over the years. In fact, even your wife is a PK. And just share just a little bit about why you are, passionate, have a heart's desire, compassion, empathy for pastors' kids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of that stems from my marriage. My wife is the middle of three, the only girl. And so many of our conversations between she and I, but also kind of as an extended family system, listening to her parents who, as my father-in-law transitioned into Bible college presidency, was more free to talk about some of the inner workings of the church and really was able to validate experiences my wife and her brothers had had. But in the time things were happening, they were protected.
Yeah.
So things that they were really inhibited from knowing, but they could sense, they could feel the shift that later on as adults, their parents could come back and say, well, here's what was really going on. It's been fascinating as a psychologist to kind of be in that system, but not of that system, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? That I wasn't there formatively with my wife and her siblings as teenagers. We went to different churches, but I'm in the system.
Yes.
So there's these experiences that I get to hear about and kind of objectively appraise that has a lot more emotional heat to them. Yeah. And there's been a lot more healing and closure to things as my wife and her siblings have aged in some of these stories. I think of Paul Harvey, the rest of the story.
Yep.
Some of the rest of the story of what was really going on, spoken by my in-laws, has really validated and clarified things for her. It says a couple things to me. A, pastors' kids are carrying things well into adulthood, and B, some of those things are wounds.
Yeah.
Right? They're carrying the good as well. I don't want this podcast to be about like it's terrible to be a pastor's kid, and like that's not where we're going.
No.
But to bear witness to this process in my wife's life of, even as some of these stories are shared, to go back and re-experience pain that had been deeply buried because that was the expectation in the system, to bring that back up and then to have some corrective experience, to have some closure, to be able to ask questions has been profound. So personally, there's this curiosity, this kind of joy of helping my wife metabolize her own experience.
Yeah.
But you mentioned professionally as well. I've worked with pastors' kids. In my doctoral program, we were in a campus ministry. A number of our students at the campus ministry were PKs, and I've just always had a heart for them. In my own experience, maybe intuiting and empathizing with some of the unique demands, even at the time I didn't have language to understand psychologically what all was going on. So for the past 15, 17 years, it's been a real joy to, as I'm able to, work with PKs and help them make sense of things that at the time there was energy in places and social influence in places in the church and outside of the church that were really impacting them, but they didn't have good language or good awareness around it. So to help them kind of exegete their own experience in many ways is healing. It's corrective for them, and it gives them a different orientation to trust, a different orientation to hope in some instances. So,
well, it is. It's such a complex whole scenario. I think of Tina and I have two adult sons. One is 26. He's in Charlotte, North Carolina at a mega church, and he's on staff. He loves ministry. He wants to do ministry. My youngest is 23, and he's in Sydney, Australia, going to Bible college and wants to do ministry. That's a part of his heart. From the early stages of their life, we early on would really impress on them the privilege that it was to be in ministry, to give our lives. When I was guest speaking prior to pastoring, I would travel all over the world, and I would be gone sometimes for 4 and 5 days at a time. And Evan was at that time in the ages from birth all the way up to 6 years of age. And there would be a few times he would just comment, when's Daddy coming home? And when he would, Tina, we had prepared how we would handle those things. It mattered to us. So we would lean in on him and say, Tina would say, honey, I miss him too. But isn't it amazing that we get to give Daddy and the gifts that God has called him into to help so many people? And we don't just stay here, but we actually get to be a part of what Daddy's doing. And what we tried to do is create dignity and really meaning, purpose behind why I did what I did and why I would be gone. From the time that they were old enough to even think about ministry and have any consciousness of life in ministry, we always told them it's such a privilege. And I would reinforce anytime we did something special, anytime we did something fun, anytime we did something unique to ministry, we would do conferences and they would get to be a part of it. And, they'd get to go do unique recreational things because they are the pastor's kid or the guest speaker's kid. And then when, we start Life Point, our church, they got to have privileges that, other kids didn't have privileges of. When we would have, guest speakers, or even, when I was in spaces where there were celebrities, they would have, immediate access to any of that. And it was, somewhat normative. When we are dealing with all that, I'm under the impression that, they had it great. And I would have loved, I compare it to me, I would have loved to have had that life growing up. Yeah. When I'm growing up in my high school years, my mom and dad had separated and ultimately divorced. Started in my sophomore year. There was all kinds of chaos and stuff. And I'm on fire for God. My life was in the refuge of Jesus. It was just amazing. But I didn't have a mentor. I had questions. I had theological wonderings. I wanted to have access to places that I didn't have access to. And so, I'm thinking, man, my kids, they got it, man, they have it. But even today, preparing for this episode, I am so aware of the incredibly unique challenges that even my kids had to navigate. And of course, it puts me in a posture with what I know about the brain and human behavior that it's not about whether there was hurts, wounds, damage in some kind of way. It's about how repair is done. Yeah. And it just is awakening within me the need for repair. I think about some of the nuances that pastors' kids have, and they are known in a congregation. They have a kind of a microcosm of fame, and at the same time, people don't really know them. And trying to make sense of what it's like to be known because of your parents and the role they play, and then not being known all at the same time, not feeling seen, heard, or necessarily validated. And then you have all the expectations that people roll over onto you, the way you behave, things you believe. I mean, it's assumed that a pastor's kid's going to believe the same doctrine, same politics, have the same ethics, and that kid is just growing and developing, trying to figure out through adolescence, who in the heck am I? And why do I believe what I believe? Then other people are expecting them, I remember hearing of pastors' kids being in a small group of some sort, and everybody turns to the pastor's kid to answer the questions like they somehow by DNA and birth are theologians, and they should be able to answer any biblical question. And then you've got the living up to all the expectations, and it creates this context that expectations are around me, and how do I find my sense of self while I am navigating this storm of other people's expectations, which is already hard for a kid in any home.
Absolutely.
With parents that, early on, their kid is dependent, so their whole identity is mom and dad, and then they're growing. But now you have this expanded sense of identity, and then you have to, deal with the struggles of who are you in what environment. So a child goes to school, and there's somebody at school. They go to church. There's somebody else at church. When they are maybe on the sports field and on the team, they are now navigating, who am I here? And how do I integrate all of these, which all kids have to figure those things out. The nuance for a pastor's kid is that you're trying to figure all that out with, again, identity, where faith plays a role, and where are the fragilities of that. And then you have people in church life who are just intrusive. They don't hardly know you. You don't even know their name. And in that space, they'll walk up and they're trying to make bids, but they just don't know the situation emotionally. But the pastor's kid is being asked things like, how was your game that you played? Now today in social media, people know things about you. How was your game? How'd you play? And you're like, I don't even know you. I appreciate you asking about, you're thinking, I don't even know you. Then you get the questions of, did you have fun on your prom date? It's like, I don't know that you should be in my prom date conversation. And then you have the scenarios of the unavailability of dad, per se. Of, pastors often are considered to be on the clock 24/7. So on vacations, we get dad alone, or we get mom and dad alone, however the ministry scenario is. And my gosh, we don't get him alone. Somebody calls, somebody needs something, you're on this, we've waited all year long to go on vacation, and lo and behold, one of the, most important people in the church dies, and now it cuts your vacation short. You have all of these, scenarios where I have a need, but I can't ask dad because sometimes in the family system, the mom has said, and she's trying to help, but she said, Dad's studying, he's praying, don't bother him. And so now you have a boundary around access to dad. And again, when you look at how the relationships with the church people, you have these people you are growing up with that you think these are going to be my lifelong friends. And something happens. It's unresolved. The whole closure thing cannot happen. And my closest friends have left the church, and I find that their parents are attacking my family, my dad. And how do I make sense of that? Right. These are my people, and I thought they loved me. And then I maybe eavesdrop mom and dad's conversations at the table, and I know backstory that nobody in the church knows as to what is going on, and mom and dad can't defend themselves or give any justification. And so as a kid, just navigating all that, honestly, is crazy. Again, you got the deal of governing boards, because some church boards are with unqualified board members who are successful in business but have no background in what a church board is supposed to do. So they wield power and influence, and maybe they make life-altering decisions for your family around your job. You lose money, now you're suffering, and it was because of the church trying to reconcile all of those things. But then on the other side, back to the positive, you've got these amazing positive situations where as a kid, you are, first of all, anytime you go to a church event, there's going to be food, from donuts to, if it's a small group fellowship or a staff meeting comes in and you have to be there, you're going to get some good food. That's a plus. I know that my kids, when we did our setup and breakdowns through the years, when we were in a school in a portable scenario, we every Saturday would set up, and then we'd go to Jason's Deli and a highlight for our kids. It was something that are cherished memories that they actually got to be a part of the setup, and then they and their friends went and get unlimited ice cream at Jason's Deli. It was just awesome. You also get certain virtuous, amazing humans that are a part of the church who do step into your life, like a youth pastor who sees you, knows you, celebrates you, is not judging you, is caring deeply about you. That's a rarity. Most parents in the world that are not involved in church, they would love to have their kids to have some kind of a role model. And then you also, as a kid, can have some level of an in-house theologian to answer any of your questions. Evan and I, my oldest, when he was like 7 years old, he came home from school, he is asking me, how do we know there's a God? And I'm like, dude, I love that question. I love that you're asking that kind of question. He said, how do we know he's not an alien? And I said, well, have you thought about it? You kind of only changed his name. That's all you did. You said there is a God, you just named him an alien. That's it. And so we had those conversations all through. We talked about dinosaurs. We talked about, Noah the ark and how that stuff could happen. I mean, everything that they would ever ask, and I would lean in on it. So you have that as a benefit. Again, the traveling to various conferences. And then the concept that, emotionally, if it's a healthy system, I can always go home to church. Church is home. Yes, there's conflicts, that all the other negative kind of things, but there is a place where I've experienced God. I have these emotional attachments now that are profoundly important and unique. So PKs are built from the time that they become a PK all the way through and now into their adulthood. And many of these kind of weirdnesses, these weird T-bones that they got hit with, they've never resolved. And they don't have an attunement perhaps to even know that narratives are around it. All they know is that it has built, as an example, social anxiety, which if I just read through all of this or thought through it, how would you not?
Yeah.
And so as an adult trying to navigate that kind of stuff. Hey everybody, I want to slide right in here and thank you for joining us for today's episode. Let me ask you for a huge favor. If this podcast is providing value to you, would you consider subscribing to it wherever you get your podcasts? Also, if you feel that it would be valuable to somebody else, please like it, comment on it, and share it on your social media feeds like YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you populate networking. And one more big favor. If you like the show, please go review it. And if it's true for you, give us 5 stars. And when you review it and rate it, it gives our efforts greater opportunity to grow, and that would mean the world to us. Now let's go back to this week's episode. So I'm just going to take that big wad of everything, and I'm just going to throw it on your side of the table, and let's just begin making sense of it.
Yeah, there's a couple threads to start pulling out. First of all, I think you're absolutely right that you kind of create this picture where the highs can be really high, the goods are really good, but the hards are really bad, really hard. And there's something of a uniqueness in the tension that PKs have to walk that out with, because they don't always know, like, when's it going to be a good and when's it going to be a hard.
Yeah.
So from a neurological perspective, I think of the amygdala and this kind of threat detection process and how they have to step into every social interaction, back to social anxiety, trying to read the valence of which direction is this going to go.
Yeah.
And it's really hard when someone that tends to be a really good, like a youth pastor that affirms them and cares for them, is all of a sudden challenging them for something that they've done in the youth group, or it's had an impact on other kids, or even well-intended things.
Yes.
Right? Like where the good becomes a bad, and there's just that shift when, and I think this is the pain that a lot of PKs carry, when things that in their experience of the church have been really good, flip, and all of a sudden become really hard, or really challenging, or I keep saying bad, I don't mean like negative, but at times can be unhealthy, or they're unequipped for. You mentioned T-bones, right? It's unexpected, something that rattles and shakes, right? There's a more unique tension in that space than for your average, youth member of your congregation, where they have the freedom to ask questions and explore and don't live in the fishbowl. Right, with all the eyes on them. And so that social anxiety is very real. And it becomes a driver for, are they going to move more into compliance, or are they going to move more into rebellion? And probably what's hard about this is, and what probably most church congregations don't want to hear, is as you look at the life of your PKs, there's 2 points of data. There's 2 systems that are being revealed. And I think that's the inherent tension, how PKs navigate their circumstance is a blend of the health of the family system, the pastoral family system, the parsonage system, I'll call it that, and the congregation, the health of the congregation.
Wow.
And I choose to believe, just after years and years of working with PKs, that most congregations think that their contribution to the equation is inherently on the good.
Yeah, right. That's true.
We held them accountable. We did all these things. We praised them. We asked about prom night and how many points they scored in their game. Right? Like not realizing that there's an intrusive dynamic to that fosters a false intimacy.
So amazing.
And like in the attempt to do good, there's this experience, this embodiment of a relational style that's rooted in false intimacy.
Wow.
And it gets back to not really being fully known, because if I really fully communicated how I feel about things and that I don't want you in my business, and like sometimes I just want to mess up like all the other kids and get it right, like get punished and not held to such a high standard, or right, there's not freedom. And it really gets into maybe the idea of differentiation. And is the congregation and is the parsonage system healthy enough to allow PKs to differentiate?
Yeah.
Well, what happens when kids can't differentiate?
Yeah.
Well, we tend to see one of a couple things. It makes me think of, from an addicted family system perspective, the idea of family roles.
Yeah.
Right? The martyr, the saint or hero, the prince or princess.
Let's pull that apart so that you can now transpose that onto the church systems. So when you're talking about a family system and the different character roles, let's really let that be seen. Because I don't think most people have ever considered that there are different, like a scene in a movie, that everybody has a character role.
Yeah, so the mascot, right? The one that is uncomfortable with emotion and uses humor to break the tension. The hero would be the golden child, the one who can do no wrong and, right, like is going to rescue the unhealthy family system, or can kind of help deflect the painful reality of the family system. Like, we can't be a bad family. Look at what Jimmy's doing. Like, Jimmy's amazing at fill in the blank, right? Academics or cross country or whatever. The martyr, right? Like the one who continually takes the blame, or the scapegoat, right? Like the one who just invariably is going to fall on their sword because they want the system to be healthy. And if the system needs a sacrifice, they're going to sacrifice themselves. Sometimes you see addicts or enablers in unhealthy systems. Right, like so, folks who adopt an addictive style in an effort to manage their stress, or those who come alongside folks struggling with addiction and just enable and propel that struggle further along. The saint would be kind of a hero with a spiritual twist. And I think that's where a lot of PKs can sometimes inadvertently find themselves. Is people already think, I'm like dad, I'm an extension of dad, I can't really be myself, I can't differentiate and say how I really feel or think. So I'm just going to become this saint. I'm going to adopt this because it's functional, right? People get out of my business. People stop questioning me or kind of voyeuring my life.
Wow.
In the same way, if I just create this air, this appearance that I'm just an extension of dad.
Wow.
Little do they know that like people are continuously giving you feedback on sermons, good, bad, and ugly, right? Have lots of opinions about what needs to happen with the church vacuum, and if the church vacuum doesn't get replaced, we're going to split. Right? Like, I mean, you're laughing, but it's true. Like all of the nonsense that shows up in the church.
Right.
A PK, to your point about the family system at the table, the PKs don't have access to all of the background knowledge, so they're playing with half a deck of cards, trying to do what they see. Like, well, this must be effective. If I just comply and just become an extension of dad and give up my differentiation, then maybe people will get out of my business.
So amazing.
Like, but what they don't know is that they're all in your business already. And that's not going to be an effective solution.
Let me jump in again and tell you about two amazing opportunities for pastors, spouses, and senior leaders of ministry that will increase your leadership. And they're both free. I'm talking about monthly Zooms and also weekly process groups. First, we hold a monthly Zoom event that is 1+ hours with Dr. Todd Bowman, a psychologist and human behavior expert, and me. We usually have around 15 to 30 other participating pastors, spouses, and leaders. The monthlies have been amazing to help pastors collaborate around tactics, personnel challenges, and even how to navigate our own inner world. The skills you'll learn and a newfound pastoral community will expand your leadership mapping with everybody you lead. These monthly Zooms happen every month on the second Mondays at 6 p.m. Central Time. And then the second opportunity for pastors and spouses is our weekly process group that spans for 6 weeks. In our weekly process group, we provide tools that guide you into your story and help you rediscover you, redefine leadership, redeem life, and redream ministry. Weekly process groups give time to open your stories as you collect the dots, connect the dots, and correct the dots. Attunement begins with you making sense of your story. When you live with mindful attunement to your story, you'll find that the people you lead will begin to also make leadership sense to you in profound new ways. Our alumni tell us that this is one of the most impactful experiences they have ever had. We place ladies in groups of 6 to 10, and also we put men in groups of 6 to 10. The value of the weekly experience is $900+ per person. However, in this season, we're offering it to you for free. You can see some of our alumni sharing stories on our events web pages. You can find out everything you need to know to get involved in either the monthlies or the weekly process groups by going to redinkrevival.com. I hope to see you there soon.
Right, and there's a lot of secrets. So you are dealing with not only the family secrets, but now church secrets, and this is the way relationships in church is done. That we don't have transparency. We don't Matthew 18:15 it when somebody's offended or not offended. So back to the family system thing. Every family, it doesn't matter how healthy they are, it doesn't matter how good they are, every family the brain is looking as a social organ, a social mechanism, is looking for how do I attach, how do I bond, how do I connect, and asking the questions of will I survive, do I belong, and then after that, what can I learn? And so in the family, when some kind of distress, something is off, something is uncomfortable, which every family has it, then each individual's brain, as a social mechanism, is reorganizing for how I'm going to address the distress. And so each of these character roles you just went over is simply the profile of how that person evolved to organize. So when you look at a particular child and you think that child is amazing or this one's not, no. What it is that this child decided to organize this way, this child decided to organize that way. So now then, as we take that and pull it over into church families, you can have a pretty good, healthy system in your home that still is going to have, issues because we're human. Right. But then you go to church and you can be the most disorganized, confused, frustrating thing you can imagine. So help us make sense of now taking those character roles and again putting them into the church.
Yeah, and I'm going to take that and put it in terms of PKs. And I think that's part of the challenge is because in the home environment, PKs have one way of being. Maybe the norms are, we'll say, healthy. Yeah. All right. There's open communication. There's questions. No question is off the table. We're going to wrestle with this together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And then you get into the church system, and all of a sudden that curiosity is not okay. Those questions, right? Like we don't ask those questions here. That's too challenging.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden they have to organize differently.
Yeah.
And I would say
that's amazing.
And we could go to a third space too, like to take this into culture. Like, and then at school, the social norms and mores are different, and they find themselves having to organize themselves differently. So they've got 3 different ways of navigating social relationships, none of which are cohesive, none of which are coherent across time and space.
Yeah.
So their formation characterologically is all of a sudden, right, informed by 3 distinct and ultimately intense, right? I mean, think about like trying to be a teenager. Right, even in middle school, I look at what my kids are dealing with. It's like, whoa, like you're dealing with stuff that I didn't have to confront until I was a junior in high school.
Oh my gosh.
And you're in 7th grade. Developmentally, good grief. Like I wasn't fully formed at 17, but 13, my kid's 13, and he's having to navigate stuff that, I mean, it's insane. Yeah. So there is an intensity and a uniqueness to that social space, that kind of peer space that's different than the church space by and large in the youth group as a subsystem of that. That's different than the home environment. So this idea of identity diffusion is the construct that comes to my mind, that there's this kind of, you can think of it as maybe the chameleon effect. Like I do what I need to do. I organize myself in different environments in a way that helps me survive the environment.
Yeah.
But am I really flourishing in those environments if I'm always having to evolve and change?
Yeah.
And it leaves us susceptible to, right, and maybe even, again, I've kind of bifurcated things here as far as compliance and rebellion, right? That some of those styles about compliance are dangerous because where are they going to spend the most time?
Yeah.
I mean, your average kid is going to spend about 40 hours a year in a church space.
Yeah.
A year, on average.
Yeah.
PK is probably more than that.
Yeah.
What's that though, 80?
Yeah.
Versus the thousands and thousands of hours they're going to spend in other spaces, predominantly schooling environment, team environment with peers, where cultural dynamics are going to work their way into their imaginations on a different level. So we have students who are in their conformity in an effort to comply with the expectations of the church, lacking differentiation, lacking that ability to say like, wait a minute, like I'm not dad, I'm different than dad. And I agree with dad on a lot of things, but like I also have my own thoughts and opinions and interests and likes and hobbies. And well, then take that into the school environment where there's a lot more immersive experience just over time and the intensity of content and challenge is just much higher. Yeah. And we've accidentally set a kid up in the church environment trying to raise PK as well by not encouraging differentiation, by not highlighting their uniqueness and encouraging them to pursue things, not that are contrary to church teaching, but like, whoa, you let your kid play soccer on a Sunday? Like, how dare you?
Right.
Like, he's supposed to be here and your family needs to sit on the front pew. And right, but that lack of differentiation, right? Like I have to sacrifice, so there's the martyr piece, I have to sacrifice things that I'm passionate about in an effort to comply with expectations that people are putting on dad. I don't want to disappoint dad. It's so complex, Patrick.
Oh my gosh, it is.
But this compliance, then all of a sudden, what happens over time, right? Well, these kids turn 16, 17, 18. They're trying to navigate that launch into more significant autonomy. Yeah. Preparation for adulthood.
Yeah.
Well, then they're going to comply with their peer group because their peer group is going to be, right, who they're spending time with, but B, like launching into college where they're getting more of those questions of, am I safe? Do I belong? Is there affirmation here?
Yeah.
Right. So more often than not, what I see as a clinician is the stories of PKs. Sometimes rebellion is the healthiest thing they can do, and sometimes that goes too far.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Drugs, alcohol, sex,
because the rebellion is trying to differentiate.
It's an attempt at differentiation. It's an attempt at saying, I don't know, I don't have language to identify why this feels wrong and violating and intrusive and unhealthy to me, but I know something's off. Yeah. And I'm trying to find a solution.
So let's define that. When people ask me, people that I'm coaching and helping make sense of their story, when they ask me, what's the most important thing? And you can apply this across the board. What's the most important thing that I should address whatever with? I tell them there's two things. First is grow your sense of mindfulness or attunement. Learn what's happening in you. Let that be instinct. Grow it until you absolutely know when you get dysregulated that it's beginning, how it's beginning, what is happening in you, what the narratives are that are behind it. Attunement is huge. The second part of that, which is, it is profound. I mean, words fail me as to how profoundly important it is differentiation. And yet that term for many of our audience, unless they've been listening to us, they may never have heard of differentiation. What the heck is it? How do I know I'm doing it? And if you could just, it's a tee up, go ahead and swing and help us understand it.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of simplify it by going back into our developmental narratives, kind of 2 and 3 years old.
Yeah.
Right. Differentiation is when our 2-year-olds wander away because they want to explore something by themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And then if we encroach on that, they'll tend to say something like, no, I do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Like they're trying to autonomize. They're trying to master their comfort with being away from us. They're trying to master the physical growth that their bodies are going through as far as picking things up. And then they'll come to us when they have a question.
Yeah.
right? They want us to see something. They want affirmation. They want explanation. Right? But we have this fear, and I think it's just gotten worse and worse and worse over time, where we are the primary intrusive force in our kids' lives. There's a reason we have constructs like snowplow parents and helicopter parents, and we're there too much.
Right.
And it's not because our kids aren't trying to differentiate. And I've not thought of this before, but I wonder if part of the uptick in problematic behavior sexually and with drugs and early drinking in our culture is because our kids are being pushed to further and further extremes in their attempts to differentiate, Patrick. To have a space that is uniquely theirs. And I don't mean unhealthily uniquely theirs, but that they can autonomize. They can have this, so 3-year-olds, right? Like then we see them put on their clothes and they want to put on, right? Like those polka dotted socks look terrible with those striped shorts, bro. But you know what? You're in the preschool class at church, like it doesn't really matter. Right? And is that the hill that we want to die on? But so regularly we force compliance. When what our kids are just trying to do is like, but I like these, Dad. Like, these are my favorite socks and my favorite shorts. Like, what is the problem? Like, there isn't really a problem there. But we're so wary and afraid of people's perceptions. Like, who would let their kids come to church looking like that? And I think, I'm gonna tread lightly here. I think pastors' wives live in such a delicate tension.
How would you like to reboot your personal finances this year? How would you like to take control of your money, turning small wins into big results? I want to encourage you to check out my wife Tina's financial coaching business at tinanorris.org. You might be wondering, what is a financial coach? A coach is someone who will personally team up with you to outline financial goals, inspire you with energy, help you stay focused on your goals, and so much more. You can do it all through Zoom, and she provides a free initial consultation, so there's no pain or cost to you for your first steps. Maybe you've been to several Financial Peace University cycles, left with great intentions, but struggled to execute. You need a trainer, a coach, another human that won't shame or judge you to help you stay on track. Tina is a certified expert that will help you with clarifying financial dreams, understanding spending patterns, reviewing all financial obligations, assessing financial and insurance needs, defining a spending plan, understanding your emotional profile related to money, building margin for savings and emergency funds, learning strategies for attacking debt, and referring recommended financial advisors to multiply your tomorrow. And she isn't selling any products, policies, or investments. She is the ultimate financial teammate. As Tina's husband of 30 years, I can tell you firsthand how much of a difference Tina's skills and giftings have made. Our financial portfolio wouldn't be a fraction of what it is today if it wasn't for her. She works with clients that are single parents, everyday people, pastors and church staff, as well as high-income professionals. I've known executives of Fortune 500 companies that manage billion-dollar budgets at work, but then come home to complete financial disorder and disappointments. Shame roars at them as they face the stresses of marriage, kids, and struggling retirement plans. A personal trainer can change the way you think, emote, and behave. If you have friends, church members, clients, or even young marrieds that are launching their financial lives, you will do them all a favor to have them check out this amazing option. If professional athletes need a coach to win the day to fulfill their dreams, then you and I do too. And you won't find anybody better to help you get there than Tina Norris. Set up your free consultation from anywhere in the world today. Go to tinanorris.org to find out all the details.
Because of the perceived threat, the perceived judgment, the perceived, even if nothing's ever said, right? The fact that people can perceive, because there's a lot, we focus a lot on the dads, right? Yeah. Typically the dad is in that senior pastoral role or associate pastoral role. But I think there's a unique bind that pastoral spouses often find themselves in. And I think it's harder on women
Yeah. Yeah.
than it is on men in that space.
Yeah. I think of differentiation, and what has helped me make sense of it is differentiation is where I know I begin and where I end, and where the other person begins and where they end. I know what I want and don't want. And when I say that, there's a difference in knowing what I want and don't want and knowing it with empowerment versus victimization. I want this, but I can't have it. Differentiation is where I'm clarifying who I am and who I'm not versus and with all the relationships of my life. And I think back into childhood that, when a child is born in their early years, they are fully 100% dependent on mom and dad. And then as they grow, like you say, they are experimenting with, I want to explore autonomy. I want to learn what it's like to do what I want to do. And as they get older, there's this tension that is between the dependent and then the person who's learning who they are, and they're building their own sense of self, which at early stages, they have an overlap. I mean, that's just growing through. So as, I think about even my kids, I remember one of my boys would he went through a season, I think it was a whole year or more, where he had a ball cap. And everywhere he went, it was a ball cap, ball cap, ball cap. And he had 3 t-shirts. Tina would buy them t-shirts, clothes. She'd buy them nice stuff, and they'd never wear it. She quit buying it. She's like, unless you go with me, I'm not buying it. Right. Because we actually had brand new, never worn stuff that we, had to
outgrown
and get rid of now. And so they would wear the same 3 t-shirts. He would, and I remember leaning in with influence on that, because as a dad, I may be dealing with my own unresolved stories, and I have anxiety of what I've seen other kids, and it's like I'm trying to get him to, have fashion and be cool and all that kind of stuff. Well, now that he's 26, I can turn around in the history of his life and think, that was no big deal. Let the boy do his 3 shirts and celebrate him. Be like, man, you really like that, don't you? Let's talk about the emotion behind your safety and comfort and soothing that you're getting out of those 3 shirts. Celebrating it rather than, because anytime you, as a dad, I am contesting it, I'm challenging his differentiation, his sense of identity. And identity, Christians love to make the phrase, my identity's in Christ. Is it? I mean, positionally and theologically, yes. Yeah. But in terms of emotional processing, is that your emotional state? If it's not, then that's still what you are in process towards. And kids, when they have an identity, the question is, what are the emotional drivers in them that make them see themselves and the people around them? That is differentiation. And that helps me. And again, I no matter where we read, and of course you're the one who has read way more and learned way more on all of this than I have. But if we simplify emotional, mental health, it begins with attunement, then it moves into differentiation before it does anything else. And if we can get those 2 right, and now then as kids, the PKs, they've become adults, and they got all that social anxiety because they've been compliant, like you said. They have taken on their organizational systems of how they're going to interact with the people that are in their lives. And now they don't know who they are and who they're not. So all they're trying to do is go into a social setting, don't screw it up. Whatever that means, I don't know what that means. And it's elusive because it's a shadow. It's something that's not real, but I don't want to screw it up. And what they have done is, rather than develop their sense of self, they have developed what other people's expectations of self is, and now then they don't know where to turn. And this is the precursor to maladaptive behavior, addiction, and so many crazy things. Again, I find it interesting.
Yeah, and it awakens in my mind this curious question around, what is the modeling that happens there? Because an undifferentiated pastor is going to overfunction, they're going to overwork, they're going to be inaccessible, right? And the rule in the family is don't bother dad, he's praying. Don't bother dad, he's studying. Well, if he's praying and studying, those can be, obviously, they are essentials to our lives as Christians, specifically in a place of pastoral leadership and responsibility. But if those are done and then they're overextended in an effort to somehow meet some unhealthy rule of expectation from a church system, and like we have a kid who is learning that being undifferentiated is normative because dad is undifferentiated from the expectations of the church. And indiscriminately, people can come over and we invite them in for dinner. The drunk guy from down the street, like we have in our house at 1 a.m. and like I can't go to sleep because dad is ministering to this guy. And it really gets back to these diffuse boundaries.
Amazing.
Right? So diffuse identity really emerges in these diffuse, porous, unhealthily maintained boundaries. So I think for listeners, right, the health of the church as a system and its relationship to the pastor is about a whole lot more than just the relationship between the board or the congregation, the pastor. It has a trickle-down effect into what those. So when I say PKs are the barometer for the system,
Man,
it's not just the parsonage system. Like it's indirectly a barometer for the health of that congregation. And there's a really interesting element to that in how our God image is shaped. Right? If dad is the pastor who is a theological boss and is called to stand and proclaim God's word and leads people into salvation is inaccessible to me. Like the template I get is God is amazing, but like he doesn't have time for me.
That's the emotion.
And do I become the hero, saint, martyr in an effort to gain approval, or am I going to go toward rebellion and say like, well, what's the point? Like it's inaccessible to me. Like it's good for all these people and they expect a lot of me, but then I metabolize that as like they have unrealistic expectations and they're judgmental and they're rude and sometimes the church is. Right, but then there's this projective identification where the things about the wounds from that PK, come to define their experience of the system, and they want no part of it. But either way, like we're not helping as they age. Unless we're fostering a sense of attunement, unless we're fostering a sense of differentiation, we're not really helping PKs grow as human beings.
Right?
And then we kind of cast stones at the pastors, like, wow, like can't believe that their kid is not in the church. This is ridiculous. Or their kid's an addict, or their kid's living alternative lifestyle. Like, some of that is obviously responsibility of the parent system, parental system in the equation. But how much of the parental system has been disengaged from care of the child because the church system demands so much?
Well, we're not talking about pastors, husbands and wives being good or bad. We're simply wanting to highlight attunement in them that these kinds of organized behaviors that we have actually have implications. They actually have consequences. And so let's go there. Let's talk to the parents for a minute. And if what's a parent supposed to do? What's a pastor, leader in ministry? What are they supposed to do? And let's talk about it from a clean slate all the way to, we've been in ministry for 10, 15, 20 years. Kids they're in junior high or high school, or maybe they're even adults. Let's kind of talk about how do we address this now and begin thinking through either how we reorganize for health, and then maybe talk about how we repair if we didn't do it the way that, would have been the most healthy way.
What's tumbling through my mind right now is the importance of boundaries.
Amazing.
Like your home, right? From a young age, right? Like your home has to be boundaried. Meaning, like, there might be times when you welcome people into your home and you minister to them and care for them. And there's other times where you don't answer the door. And people might know, like, their cars are both out here. And this is especially hard in a parsonage situation, Patrick, where we're on property, the church shares a driveway with the parsonage.
Oh my gosh.
And everybody knows because they drive by and like, oh, pastor's home, I'm just gonna pop in. You don't have to answer the door. Right? Especially if you're playing with kids or right, spending time as family. Like that door doesn't have to be opened. And it's not a rejection of the individual. Right? Like, and I can already feel the anxiety and empathy building in me around, yes, Todd, I have to open that door.
Right.
What if it's a board member? Like, the rule is, as the pastor, I have to be accessible to every whim, every beck and call.
Yeah.
My great aunt's second cousin is at the hospital. Would you go pray for her?
Right.
I'd be happy to do that tomorrow. Well, Pastor, she might not survive.
Yeah.
Well, I'll do some praying for her now, and I'll make a call tomorrow. But right now, like, this is time that I've set aside for my family.
Yes. Here's 3 scriptures. You go pray for her.
Right, but the
Right.
threat to that is, like, what if I lose my job?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So I feel that pain, and if you lose your job because you have healthy boundaries, that means you're nested in an incredibly unhealthy system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's not attunement to you as the pastor. We talk a lot about the expectations of pastors attuning and providing pastoral care and spiritual leadership and development for the church. Why is it not reciprocated?
Yeah.
And I think in healthy churches it is. In many, many churches it is reciprocated, and pastors are well loved and well cared for.
Yeah. Right.
And in others, it is the most dysfunctional system you can ever even identify.
Yeah.
Because the belief, the perception is, we are God's people. We abide by His word. We grow in grace.
Right.
We love indiscriminately, but like we can't even treat our pastor with kindness.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Like to the non-pastors listening, like that damages your pastor in so many ways, and it damages the parsonage family in so many ways.
Yeah.
And you've got to be attuned to that. Just as a parishioner, if there's unhealthy things happening in your church, like you need to speak up, because the trickle-down effect, it's not just ruining the pastor's heart and shriveling up their desire to lead. Right? It's really trickling down into that parsonage family system. And we're called to more, we're called to better in that space. But we have to get real as the church, that some of what our pastors are struggling with, and by extension what our PKs are telling us in their rebellion, is that something's amiss.
Yeah.
Something's off.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And we've got to root that out. We're called to root that out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got to think about pastors, and boundaries is a huge one. Right, huge issue for pastors. What else can they do? I love your story about allowing questions and allowing our kids to authentically wrestle and make the faith their own.
Yeah.
I think so much of that is just, we think it happens by osmosis, and like because they're the PK and we pray with them every night and they hear us preach, like they're somehow going to get it.
Right.
That might be true, but like then it's just a part of like, well, this is my false identity. This is how people know me to be, but like I've never internalized this.
Yeah.
I've never owned this for myself. Like it's been by extension, it's been by proxy.
Yeah.
Like, but differentiation means asking questions that let them explore and wrestle with and come to conclusions that might not be 100% congruent.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like as long as they're under that umbrella of grace and congruent with church teaching, like there might be doctrinal distinctives.
Yeah.
Well, holiness is a really progressive, immersive experience. Like, no, it's instantaneous.
Yeah.
Does it matter?
Right. Right.
Like we're back at socks and polka dotted socks and striped shorts. Like
right. Right.
It's okay if there's like, but I think what we fascinating. We almost rob PKs of their appropriate developmental trajectory when we expect conformity, when we expect them to be miniature versions of the pastor or some amalgam of who we think pastors' kids should be. Like we really rob them of the crises of development that they need to reach the fullness, not just of spiritual maturity, but of personal maturity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest tragedy in my mind that I've seen as a clinician, is working with young men in particular whose developmental trajectory is stunted by the rigidity and the expectation.
Hey, I want to invite you, if you are listening and thinking, I have so many questions I would like to ask. We would love to address your questions on an upcoming episode. In fact, we may do an entire episode on the one question that you have. If you will simply email us at redinkrevival@gmail.com. We will catalog all of these questions, and we would love to be able to address the things on your heart and on your mind. So be sure to get in touch with us, and we'll take the journey together. Well, the curiosity of a kid, and even the exploration that might be in opposition to, I know in my home, And we clearly got some things right and many things we didn't get right. But this is an area that I guess I am confident in my theological constructs. And if I don't know the answer to a thing, or even the defense of a thing, I know where to Google search it. And I know where the authorities are, where I can grab language and talk about it. But I would tell my kids, if it's morality, ethics, values, if it's any even theological question, but a lot of what they deal with when they're in those ages is really around things of, is there a God? That might be one. And the challenges of how can Jesus be the only way? And then particularly in a hypersexualized world, what is moral and what is not? Even around things related to dating and how dating is done. And I mentored the boys in our home around dating, but I would tell them around all those topics, and dating was one that was a lot of conversation. It'd be like, guys, I just want you to know you do not have to agree with me. But my request of you in relationship, to honor the relationship, I'm your dad, at least involve me in your exploration. Because I would love, if you do ever disagree with me, I want to make sure you have a defensible position on that. And that's it. And I'll give you ways to think about it that may be in opposition to me. I'll help you. But I don't want you to just, in isolation, come up with some kind of air castle idea and then present it to me that you are on equal ground, because you may not be. And so I invited them into those conversations. And one of the things that my boys have told me as a pastor, I'm not a pastor just in a vacuum. I have gifts. I have a pretty big personality. I'm 6'4". I walk into a room. I got a voice that is deep and somewhat thundering. And so one of my boys as an adult, we were at an event and he was kind of shutting inward. And afterwards I said, man, what was that about? And he said, I had time to think about it. And he said, you're just such a big personality. He says, I struggle to find myself in spaces where you're putting so much energy towards something. And I feel pressure to be something, because what I was doing is I was bragging on him. I was telling how amazing I think he is to some dear friends who he wants to have some credibility with him. But the bragging to him made him feel like he had to be something, or even emotionally in that presence. How do I handle this conversation? So for him, he began to shut down, and I was blown away by his attunement to his own emotional state, and that he was able to differentiate from me and realize, what I'm experiencing here is something. And I'm like, son, I'm blown away that you even noticed all that. And so let's work on that together. Help me know when I'm so big in personality, and I definitely want you to, have your space of security there. But again, when you talk about boundaries, I really want to encourage so many people, even pastors that I've interacted with, they love to use the word boundaries, but they don't apparently know what it is. It reminds me of financial budgets. The number of people that'll tell me, this is our budget. And then you begin to dig down, and what that means to them, a budget is we've got this money, and somewhere in our mind, we're thinking about allocating it somewhere. But in my home, because of my wife, who is a financial coach, my clothes, I have a budget each year for how much money I can spend on clothes. Now, all of the budget for clothes or recreation, like when we go out to eat, it comes out of a budget, which when we tap that thing, we're eating peanut butter and jelly at home now. And I mean, my wife doesn't allow a lot of margin on stuff. And what she'll do is she'll say, honey, so we don't get in conflict around money, if we do that, go to a movie or we eat out in the way you're wanting to on this, what part of the budget do you want to take that out of to offset it? And I'm like, I don't want to take it out of another part. She asked generally, do you want to take that out of our summer vacation budget? I'm like, no, don't touch that budget. And of course, what that does is allows us to interact on it. Well, when I hear people say boundaries, it feels very similar to that. Well, I created boundaries, but it doesn't seem to work. And it's like, well, you don't know what a boundary is then. because the issue is not controlling another human. The issue is knowing who you are and who you're not, differentiating, and then being able to say that I find I have enough emotional fervor and robust energy towards you to love you well when you are in agreement or you are congruent with certain things. But when you're doing this one behavior, I find myself not being able to love you well. And so I'm asking you not to do that anymore. And if you do it, I'm going to have to remove myself in certain kinds of ways, or I'm going to have to not be present at certain things so that when I am around you, I can love you in the way that you deserve to be loved. So it's not retribution, it's not revenge. Right. It is simply, I'm holding on to myself. And so I would encourage people to get Dr. Henry Cloud and John Townsend's book on boundaries and become an expert in boundaries. And it's not just a word. It is entire organized systems. And so, again, back to you. You talk about the importance of pastors or parents having boundaries in their life. Are there other things that they can do to protect the way that their kids are? You said, allow your kids to have a curious space to be able to investigate life and ministry and anything. And we can get threatened by it. But then that means we haven't done good work on our own story. So we got to do work on our own story, right? Are there other things that you want to key off of?
Yeah, I think the other word that's been in my mind is congruence. Yeah. And what came to mind was when you're talking about those conversations with dating. If you're having conversations with dating with your kids, for instance, on a theological level, on a personal level, on a social level, on a sexual level, and they've never heard you talk about human sexuality or romantic relationship from the pulpit, like you might think that you're sparing the imagination of the congregation or adhering to some implicit rule around we don't talk about sex in the church. But if your kids have never heard that from you,
yeah,
right, it feels like you're then, maybe not being punitive, but it feels encroaching. You're like, whoa, wait a minute. Like you've had all this space and I've had all this time in my life where the important things of God have been mentioned, but you've never talked about sexuality.
Yeah.
And like now you're going to talk to me on the side about relationships and sexuality and romantic feelings. And like that's a huge incongruence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially for PKs because they've lived with you.
Yeah.
Right. And they've seen you in both roles.
That's right.
And they're your child in each role.
Yeah.
And we tend to think like, right now I'm the pastor, but now I'm the dad. And for them, like you're always just pastor dad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
And that gets really confusing for PKs when there's things that are off limits, pastorally speaking, preaching, teaching, that then all of a sudden they feel like, well, you don't care about that because you haven't ever spoken to it in your position of authority as a pastor, but now you're targeting me in my personal life and trying to control me. Even though you're not. You're, if anything, you're pouring yourself out and making a part of yourself available to them to use your gifts and your wisdom and helping them grow healthily. But for them, it is incongruent. It doesn't resonate with them because it's not been spoken to in this other part of your life where you're also their parent.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of congruence. Sometimes it's the rules at the church are different than the rules at home.
Yeah.
Right? I chastise you in front of the congregation, but at home I let you do the same thing that I just chastised you for.
Yeah.
That really messes with kids.
Oh my gosh.
That sense of incongruence. And it speaks to this identity diffusion at the parental level.
Yeah.
And I get it, right? Like there is, in that pastoral calling, there's an absorbance of people's emotional woundedness and spiritual traumas, and you have to let the criticisms roll off your back as much as you can. It's impossible to do it perfectly.
Right.
But it's coming. It's part of that calling.
Yeah.
But to stay congruent, right? Like to not be so armored up in that space.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That your kids feel the difference.
Yeah.
They intuit the difference. And then at home, you're going to be different.
Yeah.
But it's about how many degrees of difference. How great is that incongruence?
Yeah.
And I think giving language to that, talking to your kids about, wow, like that was really hard today, and I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
Right? Like I had to have a hard conversation with a couple people. You don't have to name names, and like, especially to younger kids, but even teenagers who are watching. as much, sometimes maybe more than our little kids.
Yeah.
And taking their cues from us. But that congruence piece of, and when there's incongruence, giving language to it, ownership, acknowledgement, it's back to this idea of attunement.
Yes.
That you mentioned.
Yes.
And then to differentiate, like, okay, like I can leave church stuff. I got awakened at church. And sometimes that means like, I'm going to take 30 minutes between shaking the last hand and locking the doors and then going to the restaurant, like just to do some intentional dispelling of all of, again, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah.
Right? Really great to feel those affirmations, but if we get dependent on the affirmations for a sense of healthy identity as a pastor, then all of a sudden we're in the same trappings.
Oh my gosh.
I'm high when it's good and I'm low when it's bad.
Yeah.
And like if that's the modeling that our kids are intuiting and perceiving.
Oh yeah.
Like,
oh yeah.
It's not just about PKs. We're talking about the functioning of systems here.
Oh my
and
gosh,
how PKs really take the brunt of the criticism and feedback in some ways.
Yeah.
Or maybe the unfair expectations in other ways. But really, when we're seeing issues emerge behaviorally, emotionally, et cetera, in PKs, like it's kind of the canary in the mine.
Yeah.
And we need not just to move toward, look into their well-being. We need to kind of pan out and go, what in our systems, parsonage system, church system, is creating this thing that really is an indicator light for our systems.
What's interesting about congruence as you're talking about it is that it's not just a rational dissonance. It's not just, this doesn't make sense. It actually, for our kids, is a brain interpretation that has an emotional system involved in it. So a kid doesn't even often know what they are making meaning of. All they know is that internally they are now building ways that they're socially going to relate to people or other systems or environments. And it does create dysregulation. One of the areas that made me think that is so important for parents is, pastors and their wives often have a very high emotional need. A lot of pastors are like me. We will say we have words of affirmation as our predominant love language, not knowing that that love language is actually just a brain's organization around social issues, and that it isn't hardwired. It was evolved from childhood up based on attachment theory. And so, I know for years I put intense pressure on Tina to satisfy my emotions after I preached, to tell me, and it wasn't good enough for her to say that was a great message. She's, her acts of service, love language, is she would just serve me day and night. And it's like, just tell me that I blew your socks off in my preaching. That would be my thought. And of course, you're being coy. You're trying to be strategic, not to be that, vulnerable, but you're wanting it. Never realizing in attunement that this is about a dysfunction in me. This is about something that I'm grasping for to meet something in me. Well, even as my kids got older, if somebody left our church and it hurt me, I have wounds of betrayal from childhood up that are difficult for me. And when people would leave, I would, and again, a strategic, trying not to be too vulnerable with them about it, but I'm trying to get emotional support from my teenage boys, because some of the people who left had their age friends, and their friends left, and what do they know, and what are they hearing, and so I'm just kind of poking around. But really, I'm looking, and I can posture it. I mean, I'm good at that. But really what I was doing, and this is so important, what I was doing is I was entering into what psychologists called emotional incest. And it damages our kids when we look to them to support our emotional wholeness. And that is something that is not unusual for pastors, especially if they have a child or their wives. Some sons may be of a therapeutic nature in just how they have evolved. And mama, she's not getting her need met from dad. He's out 24/7 meeting the needs of the people. He's got meetings and all this kind of stuff. She's leaning in on him, the adult or the teenage son, because she really loves, and the teenage son's like, this feels amazing because mom sees me and the gifts in me feel so powerful, and I'm being effective with her. Not ever knowing that this actually is a precursor to a lot, like in our addictive modeling, enmeshment is a primary factor. And this is what we're talking about with emotional incest, that is enmeshment. And then
it's almost getting the personal needs met at the expense of the stability of the system.
Let's talk about it. I'm going to just hand it off to you.
Well, because the child in that instance is not dad.
Yeah.
And is not the one who's best suited to respond to mom's emotional needs. So he absorbs them in an effort to help stabilize the system. But in taking on that role, he's also undermining the emotional, spiritual attunement of his parents' marriage. So the short term, not even gratification, but payoff is the stability of like, wow, like things are going to be okay because mom is not frazzled. Mom is not carrying the intensity of impact because dad's been working so hard. And I totally understand why dad is working so hard. So as a martyr, I have to step into this role.
Yeah. That is
at the expense of, like the stability of the system as a whole. And all of a
costs.
sudden, mom and dad are feeling more and more distant because all of a sudden Junior is meeting the emotional needs of mom, who's happy to dump her stuff because dad's right? And then it gets back to what's driving that? Like what's driving dad's overfunctioning or pastoral overfunctioning?
Yeah.
Is it the need to be affirmed? Is it some deep-rooted insecurity? Is it unhealthy expectations? Because it's one thing for a pastor to say like, I'm going to be here 52 weekends a year and this is my responsibility, it's my calling. And the board say like, you have 4 weekends off per year. Like we're going to make you take them.
Yeah.
Like that's our expectation. Our expectation is that you not be here 4 out of 52 weekends.
Yeah.
Like don't come and sit in the pew. Like if you need to visit another church to get ideas, then go visit another church. Like if that's what you want to do with your time off. But sometimes churches as healthy systems can challenge some of the overfunctioning and the unhealthy norms. Other times it's conformity to the expectations of an unhealthy system that gets pastors in that space.
Yeah.
But we've got to be attuned to, and I do this a lot with the pastors that I work with, you have to be attuned to the origins of, the driver of. Is it a systemic driver and you're conforming to it? And you're seeing trickle-down effect, right? Or is it that you are bringing that and the church is trying to help in a guarded, boundaried, healthy way? Say like you don't need to do that. You've had a sabbatical for, last time I was on a church board, this was a conversation. You've had X number of dollars for the sabbatical that you planned 6 years ago. That money's only grown over time. Like, why have you not taken the sabbatical?
Right.
Why have you not done the degree that was planned for that sabbatical? Right. And it's really this kind of push against over-functioning. Well, when you're grieving the launching of 3 of your kids from the home in 5 years. Right? Like, I want to be there for everything and I'm going to overfunction at the expense of. So it's just fascinating how, to your point about delving into our own stories and resolving the wounds of our pasts. Those are drivers.
Yes.
Whether we know about them and are doing something, or whether we have no idea and unconsciously, subconsciously, we're kind of being dragged away and enticed, not even into like sinful behavior, but down this trail that leaves a swath of destruction in its path.
Let me break in one more time and tell you about RedInkRevival.com, REDINK Revival.com. I want to encourage you to sign up for our blog e-newsletter there, as every month it will hit your inbox with a provocative blog post with topics about theology, biblical architecture for emotions, and how understanding the human brain is so helpful in giving more insights to various biblical texts. We also will feature updates on our monthly events to help you keep up on the ready for everything that is available to you. Also, I'd like to remind you, if this podcast is serving you with valuable insights, to subscribe to the podcast. If you think someone else would benefit from it, please review it, comment, and share it on your social media platforms. If your friends are privileged to know what's helping you, who knows what God might do in their life with the same resources. That would be a gift to us, and it would be a gift to all your friends. We're holding you in our hearts and believing God with you for a year of supernatural increase.
We could do one other podcast on pastoral spouses.
Oh, absolutely.
What does it look like to feel like a pastoral kid, right? Like you can't really be friends in the same way. Like all the other ladies can be friends, but when you show up to the ministry, like you can't be 100% congruent.
It's different.
Right? Like you're gonna talk about what happened in the bedroom, like all the ladies are talking about like frequency and all sorts of stuff. I know you think that only guys do that, Patrick. I hate to scandalize you. Ladies have that conversation too.
I just think it's funny that you went there. Go ahead.
But a pastor's wife can't participate in that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To protect the parsonage relationship, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
But like it means that there's not the same access to relationship and intimacy in those relationships by way of what it means to be a part of that parsonage system.
Yeah. Or to be married to a pastor means that you have him as your pastor, you have him as your boss, if you work, because many pastors' wives are working, so you have dual roles. Yeah. Then you are trying to figure out the husband-wife role. That's 3 roles. And those roles right there create massive complications for her to hold on to identity and self. I do think we need to do one.
Maybe it's pie in the sky, utopian, idealistic thinking, but I think every church, 100% of churches, I don't even care if it means foregoing part of your denominational budget. That's how strongly I believe this.
Love it.
There needs to be, take your pick, $2,500, $3,000, $5,000 set aside so that the parsonage family, and not even just the senior pastor, anybody on the pastoral staff can get access to external coaching, counseling, therapy, whatever's needed. Whatever's needed. So that we're it's generational, man. Like we started this with why am I passionate about this? I've seen the generational impact, and we're not just talking about fixing something for a pastor. We're talking about generations worth of systemic influence. And if we can get something healthy and keep the unhealth from spilling over, right? Like that whole branch of the family of God, that branch in that specific family is completely and fundamentally changed for generations.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's an investment, I get it. Like to the point of if it means for folks who are part of denominations, you're short on your denominational budget and like you don't get a gold star at the district assembly level, right? Speaking from my tribal experience as a Nazarene, right? So be it. So be it that you've made the choice to really care well for the people who are pouring out their lifeblood. Your youth pastor, your children's minister, your associate pastor, executive pastor, senior, right? Anybody on the staff that there's, because we do it for everybody else. Right? We use the benevolence fund for everybody except for, that's an unhealthy norm in the church. To say everyone else's needs are going to be taken care of by the church finances except the staff's. I call baloney on it. It's an unhealthy norm. And it's up to churches, it's up to churchmen and churchwomen to start shifting the culture of their churches on behalf of the parsonage system. But really, when I say that, I'm talking about every staff member and every staff member's family. They take so much care of us and invest so much and sacrifice so much for us. The least we can do is foster norms in the church that say, it's not gonna be like whenever Pastoral Appreciation Month is and we'll put a 20, like it needs to be systemic and it needs to be the church saying, we see you, we affirm you. We're gonna put our resource in a place that it's a benevolence fund for pastors. For anybody in that pastoral system, family member or staff, to say, we're gonna care for you in the way that you've cared for us. That's my dream for the church. That's what I really want to see happen when it comes to helping foster health. We start with PKs, but again, like what we have found is the PKs are just an indicator light for the entire system, not just the pastoral family, the whole church system. That when we see those indicator lights blinking, like that we've already got resources set aside to help them with no financial burden, with no encumbrance, to move into accessing the resources that they need to get well.
And that's the whole motive and vision and heart behind Red Ink Revival, right? It's focused on pastors and people in senior leadership, their families, the staff of churches. This is really what we're giving ourselves to, and feel very passionate, and our confidence in what we're equipped to help people with is significant. So going back as we wind this up, as a parent allows for open-handed curiosity while tuning into the emotions of who they are, to parent that one piece is a big deal. To understand boundaries, very big deal. And of course, when we talk about boundaries is a bigger umbrella of differentiation. So we'll just put differentiation and boundaries in that same space. Then we'll move to the issue of congruence, as you just talked about it, the importance of finding congruence and how to make that healthy and right. Enmeshment or emotional incest, being aware of that and what is happening there, that ultimately comes back to us fully understanding our own story and why we even do what we do. So I want to encourage everybody, if you're a pastor or a pastor's wife, we have 6-week modules where we go back into your story to help you make sense of your story. We pull out the pieces of it and we help you connect the dots to why you do what you do today. And you can't be effective with other people around their story unless you've tuned in to your story, and particularly in this case with your kids. And it's so important that we as parents lean back into our kids with our stories being better understood so that we can repair the things that are actually in their story. And we know that parents, the most secure parents, I'm in a mentoring group with a gal named Dr. Tina Bryson. Her and Dan Siegel, Dr. Dan Siegel, wrote The Whole Brain Child. I'm in this group with her, and she and Dr. Siegel say that the most secure parents, creating a relationship of security between the parent and the child, they get it wrong approximately 50% of the time. The issue is, how do we repair? Well, at Red Ink Revival, we're trying to help people first learn their story, and we endeavor to equip them. So that is a 6-week module. It's actually free. The value's $900, but we are giving it for free for pastors or even pastors' spouses who wives. We put the ladies in one group, men in another group. And then once a month, you and I are on a monthly to continue helping people make sense of what's going on in their ministry, their life, because when you are at an emotional intersection in your ministry, that emotion doesn't just hang out there in space. It's connected to something. Yeah. And we want to help everybody understand that. Today has been a great conversation. I don't know that we feel like we have covered all the bases on it. I'm sure we'll do more episodes on it in the future. When we talked about dating and sexuality, episodes 57 and 58, where you and I talked about parenting your child's sexuality in a hypersexualized world, I would encourage everybody to go back and grab that as well. But any closing thoughts before we end this episode?
I've just been sitting here thinking of there's a New Zealand parable where an outsider comes and all the sheep are grazing together, and that doesn't make sense to our Western farming ideas, right? Like the animals are supposed to be partitioned off and people's flocks aren't supposed to merge. So very curiously, this individual kind of observes and says, like, this is so confusing. Like, why are your sheep mingling together? Like, why are there no fences? And the response from the New Zealand farmer is, when the wells are deep, the fences are few. And like when our attachment is strong, like the need to erect such kind of rigid, cold, unhealthy boundaries doesn't exist. Like those boundaries get internalized, and right when it's time to drink, like the sheep go to the wells that they know. In a healthy way. And I think that's what we're talking about is, as church systems, like how do we foster deep wells so that in light of the chaos of culture that our kids face, that if we're doing our jobs well as ministers, we're inviting that brokenness into the church because we're here to transform lives, that the more we deepen the well, the more we can relinquish the need to control the fences and the boundaries, unhealthy boundaries that sometimes get erected. So
that is so good, man. Thank you for all the wisdom today. It never ceases to amaze me.
It's always a pleasure.
What's deep in you. So it's great.